is perfection is not our goal. It's never our goal, ever, because perfection keeps you stuck, and then you keep coming back to that same dream for 10 years in a row and you never get there.
I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in today as my special guest is my sweet friend and one of my all-time favorite authors, Suzie Eller. Suzie is the author of a ton of books, 7 at least that I see on my bookshelf right now, including her most recent called Prayer Starters, Talking with God About Hard Times. I first met Suzie in person back when Proverbs 31 Ministries launched their Compel Writing membership, and Suzie was leading the community, and she's such a joy and has such a heart for supporting writers like us. So getting the opportunity to chat with Suzie here on the show had my head spinning, y'all, with everything I wanted to ask her to serve you all best. So to not overwhelm you, her interview is in 2 parts, and today we're talking all about podcasting. Suzie co-hosts the More Than Small Talk podcast with her 2 friends, fellow authors Holley, Gerth, and Jennifer Watson, and Suzie sharing how this collaboration works for them and tips for you if you're considering co-hosting a podcast with a friend or 2. Plus, we're talking about Suzie's second podcast. Yep, she hosts 2. Her solo podcast is Prayer Starters that she started 5 months before her book launch. Let me repeat that, y'all, for those of you in the back that may not be listening. She started her podcast 5 months before her book launch. And she's sharing how it's helping her to continue marketing her book long after her launch and even reach a new audience she hadn't before. Suzie's keeping it real, y'all, and sharing about the time it takes to podcast and how to overcome perfectionism if that's keeping you from starting your show. You're in for a treat today, so let's get to it. Hey, Suzie, thank you for joining us on Book Marketing Mania. I'm so thrilled for my listeners to hear from you today.
You know what, Kim? This is like an absolute joy.
I'm so glad you're here. So I want to ask you about podcasting, Suzie. So I know you co-host a podcast with your sweet friends who are some of my favorite authors as well. Suzie and Holley, Gerth, and Jennifer Watson host the More Than Small Talk podcast. And y'all have heard it here. I talked about it on episode 72. I think I gave as an example when we were talking about different ways to host a podcast. So I know a lot of people are probably thinking, that sounds fun. Let me grab some friends together and start a show. That'll get me going, right? Because I can do it alongside somebody else. So I'd just love for you to share about that. Like if there is somebody thinking, maybe I'll grab another friend or try to grab 2 friends and pull off a podcast. Do you have any tips for them if they're just even thinking in that direction?
Yeah. So I didn't think I would love podcasting as much as writing, but I do every bit as much as writing. More Than Small Talk was born out of 3 friends who are all writers that got together and said, we want to create a safe place for women to go just a little bit deeper than small talk, actually a lot deeper.
Yeah.
And that has mushroomed into 1.3 million downloads, and it's been super cool. But it's a lot of work. I think that's the misnomer that people have, that podcasting is something easy to do. It's a lot of work, but it is worthwhile. So what I would say to that person who is wanting to begin a podcast is know the why behind it, because it does require time and effort and work. And just like anything else, it takes time for it to connect and reach people. And so Holley and Jennifer and I, we get together twice a month, once a month to prep. We always wrap it around Mexican food, which makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And then we get together once a month to record 4 episodes at a time. And so we actually do that with a producer and in a radio station. It's under the umbrella of a radio broadcast. Which is a little bit different. And so they do the editing, they do all of that, but that's not where it started. It started for a year and a half of us working toward growing that podcast. And I don't know that I answered your question, but just know your why. Know
Mm-hmm.
why you want to do it, because it takes time to build that audience. It takes time out of your schedule to plan those.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that if you're someone who loves to communicate that message in a different medium, it is a really cool way to do it.
Yeah, no, that's so great. And I think, it's unique that the three of y'all live close by so you can get
It is.
together, twice a month. But I love that you have it planned. Like we're going to get together this time and we're going to plan everything. And then we're going to get together again and record everything. So I think, yeah, if you're not close by, then you might have to do it virtually and that may have other things factored into it. But I'm so glad you said, like, just, you got to just kind of start and don't get wrapped up in, oh my gosh, well, yeah, they have this amazing podcast because they have this amazing studio, but you can just get started because you may not even like it. So, at least get started
Yeah.
and try it.
I was coaching someone recently and she was really struggling with writing a book. She hated the thought of it, but she thought that was the only outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, hey, what do you think about a podcast? Well, she's a speaker who feels compelled to share a message. And she was like, is that even a possibility for me? It absolutely is. She was
Mm-hmm.
already, honestly, she was doing lives on Instagram. She was doing some other things. And I said, what I want you to do is I want you to sit down and just talk for 5 minutes at a time, record yourself, and just see what you think about that. And she came back lit up on
Oh.
fire. So she is right now, she has put the book aside for right now, something that she hated and dreaded.
Mm-hmm.
And she is running after with all of her heart after creating a once every 2 week podcast, which works within her time schedule as a
Mm-hmm.
mom. And she's super excited about it. I would say this too, and it's what I told her, is perfection is not our goal. It's
Mm-hmm.
never our goal, ever. Because perfection keeps you stuck, and then you keep coming back to that same dream for 10 years in a row and you never get there.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that next step is our goal. What is the next step for you? Is it to learn GarageBand? Is it to learn how to record? Is it to buy a good mic? What is the next step? Take that step, conquer it, and then take the next one. Not with perfection, just learn
Mm-hmm.
it and then
Mm-hmm.
take the next step.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such great
That's what
advice.
you did, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I'd like, like you were saying, like with her schedule every 2 weeks, and that's how I started too. It was like, let me just try this every 2 weeks and let me just see if I even like it, And then once I got under the groove and was like, okay, I'm committed to this, then I changed my frequency and, you can change up. Do you want guest or not guest or anything? And yeah, I mean, gosh, sometimes I struggle with the perfectionism more about video though. My podcast, I'm just like, whatever people like it, I guess, because they're listening and,
They do like it.
and it's just, I can't, I think if I struggle with perfectionism on that, I would never be here 2 years later. So well, let me ask you, so also, because I mentioned in the introduction that Suzie also hosts the Prayer Starters podcast, which is your solo podcast. So, Suzie's a great resource because again, she co-hosts a podcast for many years now. And now she also has her own solo podcast. So she knows a lot about podcasting and she's been a guest on a ton of podcasts too. But talk about, for those thinking about launching a podcast, how you kind of decided to do your prayer starters. It was at least 5 months before your book by the same title was launched. So how did you decide
Yeah.
on that?
Prayer starters is something I have always done in my personal life.
Mm-hmm.
And it eventually became a book and hopefully will become other books. But it was something that I had a lot of people coming back and saying, Suze, tell me about prayer starters. What are you talking about? How does that connect you with God on a more personal level? How can I use this in my own life? And so I approached the network that More Than Small Talk is on. And I said, I want to do a 5 day a week. And I know that's crazy, but I would like to do a 2 to 3 minute prayer starter podcast where I do a scripture, and from that scripture, a drop of encouragement and a prayer starter and an invitation to take it deeper. And they said, sounds great. We don't have the bandwidth to do a daily as far as uploading and all of that. We'll host you. We'll be excited for you, but if you have to do this. So I had a huge learning curve. I
Mm-hmm.
had to learn garage. I had to learn and get my own great mic.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a learning curve and started taking those next steps. And what now is I do them in series of 10s. I'll sit down and the writing for me takes way longer
Mm-hmm.
because more than small talk is unscripted. Prayer starters, because of the time, is scripted, though I very rarely stay true to the script. I often make
Mm-hmm.
the Lord go off. But I write about 10. My local public library has a podcast studio that's free. I make an appointment, I go there, I record 10 at a time. And while I'm in that same room, I never edit a 2 to 3 minute podcast. I just start over if I mess
Mm-hmm.
up. And then I upload them while I'm there, and I'll have 2 weeks at a time that I'm going. And that's what works for me. The writing is a ton of work. But I would say, out of everything I've ever done in my entire life, there's nothing that brings me more joy than prayer starters. I sit in that podcast room and it's dark and it's padded. And there are times that as I'm sharing those, that God just shows up. And I pray that that comes across. And
It does.
but there's times that he takes the power of the word and a drop of encouragement and he puts it in my heart first and he talks to me about it first. And it is something I truly love to do. But it's the hardest I've worked in a long time on anything. And I've worked hard on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I could imagine, and especially you as a writer, writing is very natural to you, but just planning those out. And it's an amazing podcast. And 5 minutes, it blows me away how much you could pack into 5 minutes and impact somebody's day. So do you think it's really helped you reach new listeners long after your book release?
I'm reaching younger listeners, which I really love. There's a whole different community that has come in to Prayer Starters. It is a generation who's pretty disillusioned in some areas of their faith, and yet they love Jesus and they want to connect with him. And so that has been a really beautiful part of this is I'm getting to hear from people who say, you know what, I left my parents' faith, but I didn't want to leave my faith, didn't want to leave Jesus, or I left this part of my faith. But there was a hole.
Mm-hmm.
And now God and I are talking again. And that brings me a lot of just, I don't know. I don't even know the right word for that. I'm just so grateful.
That's so incredible. Yeah, you're just definitely fulfilling what God's calling you to and setting such a beautiful example for us all, Suzie, because it's just like I say, 5 minutes, you never know what kind of difference you're making in somebody's life that you maybe didn't even imagine you'd be reaching that target audience.
Each of those 5 minutes takes about 45 minutes to study and write it because it has to be in context. I want it to be something that's truly grounded in scripture. But you know what that's doing for me is that is grounding me in the word in ways that are even deeper. And so again, it's hard, it's good, and I'm grateful to do it. And I would do it 10 times over.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so good to say. And it's such great evergreen content. That's what I was thinking too. Is like, we can't think of it as like you're putting all this work into like one thing that just goes out the door and it's gone tomorrow. I mean, people can discover this podcast for years to come. And it's a very evergreen, the topics you talk about again, like today's on distraction. I mean, every day it just hits you in the right way. And I think if you were to go back and listen to episodes a second time, at a different time of the year, it's gonna, hit you differently on what God wants to speak to you about that day. So, it's just incredible. So thank you for starting Prayer Starters and encouraging all of us to dive more into our prayer life.
Thank you. Well, and to the person who's just listening right now, because I've stressed about it's a lot of hard work. I'm not saying that to intimidate you. I'm saying that to invite you because anything that we partner with God on, if there's a learning curve or it takes time, he can use that in ways that are incredible. So, and I have made mistakes. I have went on and listened to an episode where I realized that I didn't do something in the program that I should have. And so it should have been 2 to 3 minutes, but then we have 5 minutes of silence afterwards. I know exactly what I did wrong when that happens. The listener doesn't, but they're pretty forgiving. So you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and it helps the rest of us to see a mistake, which I have a hard time believing there's any mistakes in yours, but it helps all of us to see that. They're like, it's okay, just go on, like there's just going to be another episode.
Friday. I have one from last Friday that I need to go back, and I didn't trim it. I didn't do it. But it's okay. When that first happened, I was just kind of like, I beat myself up. It's like, oh, I should have known better. I'm in a learning curve, and there's grace for that. So if we don't take the steps because we're afraid we're going to make a mistake, then it's just not going to happen.
So true. Such great advice. Oh, Suzie, this has been so good today. And I'll be sure and put links to your courses and your podcast and your books, of course, in the show notes so everybody can come and find you online. And I so appreciate your time today serving our listeners.
Thank you, Kim. I love what you do so much.
Oh, thank you. Oh gosh, y'all, I'm so grateful for Suzie's generosity to share about how hosting a podcast, or two in her case, check the show notes here in your podcast player so you can tune into Suzie's podcast, and be sure to click the follow button here on Book Marketing Mania so you don't miss an episode, as next time is part 2 of our conversation and Suzie sharing about finding the heart of your book idea, crafting your book proposal and where she sees writers needing the most help, and building an authentic community of target readers. Y'all, it's priceless. So thanks for tuning in today. And as always, I'll be there for you next time to help you build your audience and market your book one podcast at a time. See you then.